Hi, my name is Stephanie Hurd, and I'm presenting on schistosomiasis in South Africa. Before I start, I wanted to ask who has even heard of schistosomiasis at all? No one. Okay, that's what I expected. That's totally fine. Well, it's a parasitic disease, first of all, and because it's a parasitic disease, that's why it relates to my major, because my major, just declared, is biology. So we talk about microorganisms such as parasites like this. Now, another question. It's going to seem totally random. I promise it's related. When you're on your way to Toads, to New Haven, going through that park, how many of you, or if you don't want to admit it, your friends, people you see, take a little detour to relieve yourselves on a tree, on Yale, something like that? Be honest, raise your hands. Have seen someone. I've seen many people. Everyone's seen that girl. All right. If you or whoever did it was living in certain parts of South Africa, it's very possible you would be infected with schistosomiasis or help spread the disease of schistosomiasis by doing so. So, it's a parasitic disease, and it's appalling how little awareness there is of it. For instance, none of you heard about it, and I didn't hear about it until last semester when I was in Ireland, and I took a course on public health and the environment. So it's a disease of poverty. What that means is that it only affects impoverished communities such as those in South Africa because it has to do with sanitation, lack of education. So anything that affects impoverished communities is a disease of poverty. It's also called a neglected tropical disease because these are diseases that, although they affect a lot of people globally, like worldwide, in Western countries like the US or European countries, they aren't really a problem. So as you can see by that map, it shows the distribution of it. They're not a problem, so no one really cares about them or does anything with it. So that's why it's called neglected. It's also a waterborne disease. Now, because it's a parasite, I didn't want to, have you to deal with the grossness of it and give you too much detail, so I'll leave it at this. The life cycle of it, what happens is that there's an infected individual that will go to a certain body of water and will urinate or defecate and will contaminate that water. Then the parasite infects the snail host, which is called an intermediate host, and then that will then carry it through the water so that when a new individual enters the water, even comes in contact with like a little bit, a few drops, they will become infected, and that's how the cycle progresses. And if you are interested in it and want to get a little grossed out, you can go to this website and provides a lot more detail for you. Some of the symptoms are listed here. For those of you that don't know, anemia is a deficiency of red blood cells. These symptoms are incredibly painful and debilitating, so when you become infected with it and you exhibit these symptoms, it really affects your everyday life. You can't go to school, you can't go to work. It's very painful, and it's awful that people have to suffer this. The picture on the right is severe cases. You'll see one of the symptoms is enlargement of organs, so that's obviously what's happening here. Here are some of the causes. All the causes have to do with the fact that this occurs in impoverished communities. So for a lack of education, it's a big one, inadequate sanitation and water treatment. Sanitation just has to do with the removal of human waste, while water treatment is, you think about the water plants that we have and how they remove contaminants from the water. The interesting thing, what's really sad, is that the children are the #1 victims of this disease because a lack of education is a major cause. Because also the victims are also the #1 person that's going to spread the disease. Since they're least likely to be educated about it, they'll go to the bathroom anywhere, will contaminate water supplies, don't really know about washing their hands, and so they're the ones that suffer from it most. What's really sad is that it's almost unavoidable at certain times because people come into contact with infected water just going about their everyday routine. Think about how often we use water and come into contact with it. What are things we do during the day that we touch water? Like, yell out some examples. Washing your hands. Showering. Something's damp, yeah. Cooking, if you think about it, washing your car, anything with agricultural, just washing yourselves. So think about all that, and if you have an infected, contaminated body of water, then you can easily become infected. Also, over 1/3 of South Africa's population lacks adequate access to proper sanitation. So that's 1/3 of the population that could easily become at risk to being infected by schistosomiasis. An example of not proper sanitation are pit latrines, which you can see in this picture right here. I actually just read an article about a boy who died at school from falling into one of the pit latrines. As you can see, it's really just a hole in the ground. There's nothing around it at all. It's just a row right there. And that's a major problem because you think about how much of an issue education is and schooling is for some people in South Africa, for those that are impoverished, and now you have to deal with sanitation in those schools as well. I also read an article that said a major cause of girls not getting an education is the lack of hygiene associated with sanitation and going to the bathroom at school. The treatment, what angers me the most, I'd say, is how easily this problem could be solved. The drug, it's called Praziquantel, and it cost 18 cents. That's it. Comparatively speaking, though, that's very expensive for some South Africans who live in communities that can't afford this. If you are very poor, you don't have access to medication like we do here in America. Another obvious way for treatment is to eradicate one of the causes, which is sanitation and water treatment, providing bathrooms that are hygienic or providing drinkable water and usable water. If there is proper sanitation, then the water won't become contaminated in the first place. And if there's water treatment, then that contaminated water can become usable again. Education I started because it's the biggest one. If people are not aware of how you spread the disease and the importance of proper sanitation, then they won't think about it. They'll use the bathroom wherever, and it's going to continue to spread the disease. Another interesting treatment has to do with a snail host control. So the snail is an intermediate host, which means that the parasite needs to infect some of the snails for a period of its life cycle to mature and then reinfect humans. So some options would be to kill snails in bodies of water, but that, Danielle doesn't like that, but that also leads to problems because if you use chemicals, they're very toxic, so that would hurt other organisms in the environment, such as fish, which the population surrounding the water needs to eat for food and to survive. There's also an option for introducing snail-eating fish into the environments. Again, there's also positive effects, negative effects, because you're kind of messing with the whole ecological balance there. So apartheid actually plays a huge role in schistosomiasis. Because of apartheid, people were forced to live in unhygienic living conditions. We've learned about that a lot. Blacks were forced into one area, and they were forced into areas that were not great living environments. And now if your great-grandparent, not your grandparent, you or your parents lived there for generations, families are going to continue living there because if you don't have resources like financial resources, you can't relocate to a better environment. So you're stuck in conditions that allow and facilitate the spread of schistosomiasis. Also, the income gap. If you don't have a lot of money, all you're going to be able to do is use pit latrines or go in the woods. You won't have access to proper sanitation. Also, there's a cycle of poverty that's created. If you're poor and you get schistosomiasis, then you can continue to be poor from it because if you have the symptoms, then you can't go to work, you can't get a job, you can't get an education because you can't stand up sometimes. And if you can't do that, then you won't be able to rise out of the poverty. Also, there's a failure of ANC. As we learned about, they've been promising housing for the people for so long, and although it's improved in some areas, it hasn't fully benefited everyone. So that's a problem too. Human rights. We learned about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and here you can see everyone has the right to life, work, medical treatment, right to education, and this schistosomiasis, it violates all these rights because people can't have access to any of these. Also, women's rights. We heard about in Half the Sky the issue of maternal mortality. During a pregnancy, you can see schistosomiasis causes great complications. For the QU seminars, locally, you think about Quinnipiac. How many bathrooms are in this building alone? There are a lot. We're very lucky, and I take that for granted a lot of time, I know personally. Also nationally, in the US, we have the Environmental Protection Agencies, which imposes regulations on water, so we have safe drinking water. And globally, it's just about being a global citizen. It's about being educated and helping others that don't have access to clean water. And what you can do. This is a great blog. If you go here and click on the tab that says H2O organizations, it has over 100 different organizations that help around the world with water. An example is the Baba Health Initiative with Dr. Richardson, who's a professor here at QU. We're excited.
Questions? Olivia?
Is this found in the United States at all?
No. It's not in the US, not many European countries, just because, like I said, it's a neglected tropical disease, so any Western countries don't have to deal with it because it's, when they say impoverished communities too, it's people that live in like South Africa and impoverished communities, not really just someone living on the streets of New York, for instance.
Does medicine, praziquantel or whatever it's called, does that help someone once they already have?
Yep. Yeah, and that's what's so frustrating is that it's so cheap. It requires one dosage of the medication, and 18 cents, and that's it. And maybe a few more dosage if it's a really severe case. But all you do, it's a tablet, it's a pill. You take it with water, and you're good to go. So.
Is this pretty common in like most developing countries as well?
It is actually. It was tough to find information specifically on South Africa because it would just be like Africa, and it would say how many people are affected by it. But yes, any developing countries, even India, South Africa, it's more in the warmer areas though, tropical. But if you have a body of water and poor sanitation, it's really easy to get a parasite like this. So. Sweet.